The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Hello, I'm Ray Lemura, and welcome to this edition of Cable Reports. Our guest today is former delegate Joe May, and his guest, Pat Daly, who is the president of the George C. Marshall International Center. Welcome.
Thank you.
I want to spend a little time talking about the center, but also about the man who it's named after, George C. Marshall. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about General Marshall's history?
Okay. Well, you know, George C. Marshall is not a household name in the U.S., much more so in Europe. He was born in 1880 on New Year's Eve in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and he was graduated from VMI, a cadet, with his commission as a lieutenant. He served with General Pershing in World War I as his aide-de-camp, and then also in France after the war. And then he moved on in his career to serve as Secretary of the Army. And most people know him for the Marshall Plan, but there was just so much more in selfless contribution that Marshall made to the world, really. He served while living in Leesburg in his house, which was called Dodona Manor when they moved in, although they didn't name it Dodona Manor. So subsequently we have renamed it the Marshall House to be sure that there's an association between the house in Leesburg and Marshall. But while he lived in Leesburg, he accomplished many of the things that he is known for. He was Secretary of State, President of the American Red Cross, Secretary of Defense, and then he also, of course, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1953 for his initiation of the European Recovery Plan, which really saved Europe after World War II and became known as the Marshall Plan. So in a nutshell, that's Marshall's life. There's so much more to tell, of course, but he was truly a great man and a selfless public servant, very interested in conservation. So we think that, you know, our mission is to preserve his legacy and to make sure that people understand much of what he did is still very much relevant to today. Having said that, I think I can talk a little bit more about the Marshall House and our work, if you like.
Yeah. Well, and Joe, maybe you can share a little bit about what has drawn you to the interest of General Marshall.
Well, I've actually been a General Marshall fan for a number of years. In fact, back in 1994, pardon me, I was interviewed for a magazine article, and they asked me to name my heroes, and George Marshall was my hero, and they asked why. And I said, well, technically he was very, very good, but equally he was by all measures a gentleman and a scholar. And someone that you want to pattern your life after or to have the same sort of motivations that he had. So I've been a fan for a long time, have been a member of the board of the Marshall Center for almost 20 years, but in the last several years here, the activity level has increased dramatically, and we're engaged in some programs that I'm really very pleased to be a part of.
Great. Tell us a little bit, how did the center start, all to begin with? I mean, I know because VMI has a program for General Marshall because, as you noted, he graduated from there as a cadet. But tell us a little bit, how did the center really get started?
All right. In 1989, the center was originally formed as the George C. Marshall Home Preservation Fund because there was a developer in Leesburg that was attempting to purchase the property, planning to raise the house and create a shopping center, which he would have called the Marshall Shopping Center. I think Marshall would have rolled in his grave.
Pat, if I can interrupt just
Sure.
a minute. Here we've got a Nobel Prize winner
Right.
in Leesburg, and they're going to tear the
They wanna
house
tear the
down.
house down.
I was at Cambridge University a couple years ago, and they took me to Sir Guy Cockcroft's home, who was a Nobel Prize winner, and they made a shrine out of it. And we're going to tear it down and make it a
Well,
shopping
shopping mall,
center.
it kind of equates to the same
The
thing.
American way, right?
No, we need shopping centers but not at Cambridge University,
Right.
Sal.
A prominent Leesburg citizen, B. Powell Harrison, organized a group of local folks, and the effort to save the house, purchasing it from the grandchildren, and then restoring it, began, and it took 15 years to raise the money to do it. But I'm happy to say that many of the Marshall Plan countries, those countries in Europe that participated in the Marshall Plan, pitched in, and in many cases, $250,000, and significant contributions, because of course they all benefited from the Marshall Plan. So the restoration began and was completed in 2005. Ann Horstman, who was an incredible leader during that time, a self-taught restoration expert, did an incredible job. I mean, much of the authenticity of the house is due to her labors and her serious effort to adhere to restoration exactly as the house was in 1952. As you tour the house, you really do get a sense of the man, because the house, although it's somewhat large, its furnishings, many of them came from estate sales. Secondhand furniture and that kind of thing, because Mrs. Marshall loved to shop in at estate sales.
Well, the shopping mall would have been
Well,
enjoyed that.
I think she was more the peeking in and out of old homes for antiques type of shopper. But in the kitchen and in the library, you can really get a sense of the Marshalls. General Marshall loved the library, and they spent a great deal of time in there. So when the restoration was done, the group actually sent all of the books, which were Marshall's, out to be restored. And the cost of restoration of his book collection was about $30,000. But they were heavily, encrusted in mold, and they look beautiful. And they're actually placed on the shelves exactly as they were when they were found. So you see, you have to picture this house that was at one time, a setting for so many interesting, both political and military visitors, deteriorating to the point that there was moisture everywhere and vines all over everywhere. It looked like a haunted house, and the effort to restore it was of great magnitude. So I think that we've created something that's a real benefit to the community, and we do enjoy visitorship. We're one of the few house museums at which visitorship is increasing as opposed to remaining level, which is the mark of success for a house museum,
Right.
or deteriorating. So we are finding more in the way of visitorship at the house.
Pat, something I think that bears mentioning is the fact that almost nobody knows about Marshall in this country, but very often when we have European customers in to visit my company, I'll take them by the Marshall House, and some of the visitors that are with me as customers are in tears just because they're so impacted by the fact that here's the guy who was responsible for the program that kept them from starving to death.
Right. Exactly.
Literally, one of our customers, a man named Peter Clement, and he was in tears. He said we wouldn't have survived the winter of 46, 47, 48
Right.
without the help from that program.
So much is the generations are changing, and those folks who were impacted by Marshall are changing, but what he delivered not only to this nation but to those nations who were affected by the Marshall Plan are changing and not really remembering all of his accomplishments. So these initiatives are important. And were there other leaders in the community who you really want to mention who kind of stood out as helping to save the house?
Well, you can probably help me with that, because the restoration was actually completed before I came to the Marshall Center in 2011.
Okay.
I would
B.
say-
Powell, of course, Nestor Sanchez, Fred Moorfield, to name a few. It was actually a pretty big community effort
Right.
to do all this, and it's unfair to the others
You
to
don't want to leave
single out.
anybody out. Right.
Well, and Bob Sevilla was very, very instrumental
Yes.
in taking care of all the legal work,
Absolutely.
and very, very supportive as
Right.
well. But when the organization was formed, the founders actually had a much larger vision for what it would become after the restoration. They expected that we would become an education center that was exemplary, and that had programs, both national and international, introducing students and at all levels, and adult students as well, to Marshall and the many contributions that he made. But even more importantly, how relevant all of what he did is to the current geopolitical climate, for example. You often read in the newspaper, we need a Marshall Plan for Afghanistan, we need a Marshall Plan for here and there. But I think many people don't really fully understand what the Marshall Plan was.
Right.
Many Americans think it was just another one of those U.S. bailout programs, but in actual fact, it benefited the U.S. back in the post-war era as much as it did Europe, because the money was lent to the countries to purchase supplies, and of course they had very little manufacturing, so they purchased the supplies and grain and that sort of thing from the U.S. So both the U.S. economy and the European economy were benefited by the Marshall Plan.
Right.
I think it would probably be fair to point out that we actually have a couple of phases to the entire program, but the restoration of the house is actually a restoration of the house, and the opening of it to the public at large is one of the major efforts. And you might want to mention that just a little bit, Pat, because it brings so much of the community into it.
So when the house opened, there were people who were very, very fond of Marshall and his place in the community. When he lived there, he was a member of the Catoctin Farmers Club, St. James Episcopal Church, and also the Rotary Club. So it was not unusual to find him walking down the street, going to church or whatever. He was not treated as a celebrity because he preferred not to be. In fact, one really nice story is that when he became General of the Army with the 5th Star, and later in his other posts, he, of course, was entitled to a driver. Well, he would drive his Jeep to Tyson's Corner, where the driver would pick him up because he didn't want to be seen being chauffeured around Leesburg. So, that tells you a little bit about the man as well. But the house is really the center of what we do. It's what makes us unique. The Marshall Foundation has all of Marshall's papers and a wonderful library, and the archives are there on the campus at VMI. But the house in which Marshall lived, it was the only house that he ever owned, really, was purchased in 1941, and he lived there until he passed away in 1959. So the house is the center of our activities, and the grounds make a wonderful venue for all kinds of activities. We have the largest Veterans Day commemoration in Loudoun County, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're planning to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan speech at Harvard University in this June, a little bit later. At the core of our education programs is our docent corps. I would call them the docent corps. They are led by a man named Tom Bowers, who is a former journalism professor from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and he has transitioned the group, or transformed the group, I should say, into a serious professional workforce. They study Marshall, they read all the latest books about Marshall, they have an incredible tour that they give, and Tom has produced or published a handbook for the docents, and they all follow it religiously. He trains them. They also shadow more experienced docents, so they take the volunteer docent job very, very seriously. And we are just so incredibly fortunate to have people who are such admirers of Marshall and so knowledgeable of Marshall. I have been at the Marshall Center since 2011, and from time to time I will tag on to a tour, or I will bring prospective donors through for a tour with a docent, and I learn something new every time.
Right.
They all have their favorite stories, and they're just so enthusiastic and so knowledgeable. I can't say enough about what a wonderful group they are.
Right.
So, as Joe said, that makes us somewhat special and unique, and we're very, very proud of that.
Right.
So in addition to the programs that are conducted there in the house, the docent programs, we have international speakers who come, and local speakers as well. But they often have a connection with national security, the State Department, We've had former ambassadors speak, and I can mention a little about those later. But I thought I would, in addition to the international programs, speakers programs, I thought I would talk a little bit about our education programs, because in creating and expanding our education programs, I think we are truly fulfilling our mission. The Student Partnership Exchange Program was founded in 2006 as part of a partnership between Loudoun County and Main-Taunus-Kreis in Germany. The two regions.
So it's really
Yes,
an international experience.
That's
that
right.
You mentioned Germany, which
Yes.
is really the
And
ground
not,
floor.
And not just Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
So in 2006, that partnership was formed, and German students came to the U.S. the first year, and then it became a reciprocal exchange. So each year we host 15 or so German students. They're high school students in the sophomore, junior, and senior years. And then and we do that in late fall, September, October, and then late November to take advantage of Thanksgiving holiday, so the students are not out of school more than a week. Our students go to Germany, so of course that means they're going just as the Christmas markets are being erected all over Germany, and it's a very special time there. But what's unique about that program is, in addition to living with host families so that it's a real cultural experience, they also have a career exploration experience in a German business. Can be a hospital, can be a government office, a journalism office, that kind of thing. And some of the experiences they have had are just incredible. We had a scholarship student. We also provide scholarships for students on a need basis, as needed basis. But one of those students in 2012, who has always wanted to be a surgeon, was suited up in scrubs and went into the operating suite with the surgeon for 3 days and witnessed or watched 12 different procedures. That would never happen in the U.S., of course. But we've also had students who are interested in being pediatricians come into the ward where babies are being born, holding a 2-hour-old baby, or whatever. So they all talk about their experiences as being influential in terms of their future studies. In fact, that particular student I was talking about, who was in the surgical suite, is a pre-med student at Mary Washington.
Oh,
So, we look at that as kind of a success, or a measure of success of the program.
Now, how does a high school student find out that this program even exists? And how many do you take into the program?
We advertise in the local newspaper. The Loudoun County Public School System has been very helpful in putting our flyers up on their internet, their website. We are not affiliated with the school, and they do not, support us in any way other than to provide career exploration experiences for the German students who come over, and also help us with advertising. They also have a couple of programs, Campus and Avid, to give extra support to students who are going to be first-time college attendees and that sort of thing. And we often will receive very, very highly qualified students from those programs, and we like to give them the opportunity that they would never have.
Is there a deadline for applying for the high school program?
Yes. Well, right now we've closed our Weingen program.
Okay.
Weingen is outside of Stuttgart, and so that one, the students will be traveling in June. And then the Main-Taunus-Kreis program application deadline is April 15th.
Okay.
We also have conducted pilot programs in France, 2 places in France, Metz and Saint-Cyr-sur-Loire, and in Austria since 2013 to Vienna. So those are each program is very different from the other based upon its location. As you can
Is there
imagine.
information on your website?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So.
You can find information about all of the programs on the website.
Okay.
And we're sort of staging the application process this year because we're thinking that we're going to bring on another pilot program in Garmisch, where the European Center for Security Studies is located. Rachel Thompson, who is the author of the biography we published in 2014, has actually delivered seminars at the European Center for Security Studies in Garmisch twice. And so you see and Rachel began as a docent. So, you see our programs evolve as people's interests evolve and as they are more and more qualified. And we are sharing an awful lot about what we do and about Marshall with people in Germany and in France. Rachel has spoken at the Hotel de Talleyrand in France, where many of the Marshall Plan negotiations took place. So, you know, steeped in history, calling on those connections to continue to spread the word about Marshall and his relevance to today.
You're kind of looking to the future because there's also a STEM program
That's
that
right.
exists. And I want you to talk a little bit about the STEM. I know, Joe, these are kind of issues that right in your wheelhouse.
Well,
You want to talk about that?
pardon me?
You want to go ahead?
Okay, sure. You may remember from my years here that STEM was of considerable interest to me, and some of the programs that we worked on then are still in effect, and I'm still working with them. But we saw an opportunity to generate a STEM program in connection with the Marshall Center within the Marshall countries, those that received aid under the Marshall Plan. So what we did was, what we've done over the last 2 years is conduct 2 pilot programs in which we recruited or accepted a group of students here, and it turns out typically freshman or sophomore engineering students are probably most optimal. We send them to Germany with a participating partner. We're fortunate enough to know a company over there, which is a very large company, which is quite willing to cooperate with us. We send the students to them, and they send a corresponding group of students back to us. And our students get the opportunity to work in a very large, very modern electronic manufacturing environment. And of course, the German students get to come and work in what I hope and think is a pretty modern electronic manufacturing effort in our company, but we're actually spreading it out. The part that I'm really pleased with is the fact that the company in Germany, Zoner Electronic, was founded by an individual who's still active in the company. So when our kids arrive over there, Herr Zoner actually carved out an hour of his own time and spent just sitting and chatting with the kids and telling them how he started the company and so on and so forth. And this is the equivalent of our kids having the opportunity to visit with Henry Ford back in the day when he was making manufacturing a science, not a pastime. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about it, and I guess best of all, I feel I speak the same language as those kids, so I enjoy being a part of it.
That's right. Yeah, you talk funny to me sometimes.
So the experience that the students have is when the German students come to the U.S., they spend time in Joe's company, EIT. And our students, when they go to Germany, they spend time particularly in the training center at Zollner, because in Germany they have a model where you, as you're being educated, you are also being educated practically. And that is something that our students think that we are way behind, you know, in this country are way behind, and that the benefit of being able to actually build a circuit board while you're learning about the way it works is just immeasurable. So there are a lot of pictures of our students working on different projects with the folks in Zoner. It's a cultural exchange too. Germany, in Bavaria, is very different.
Pat, I have to interrupt you, but technology is part of the culture anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at any of the people that you see in Zoner's company or our company, they all have the common language of technology, and I think we're finally just discovering that, hey, in the same way you have to learn to speak the English language, you have to learn to speak technology.
Right.
And it is universal wherever you go.
Right. And you're talking about adult education and continuing those kind of topics and bringing in some world-renowned speakers. So who are some of the speakers you've had, and who are you, that you're planning on having?
I know my favorite right off the bat.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, one of the speakers was the historian for the National Security Agency, and he brought a German Enigma encoding machine circa 1938, and it still worked. You could type it, and the little lights lit up, and so on and so forth.
Wow.
We had a absolutely full house, and everybody wants to finger the Enigma machine.
That had to be fascinating to see one of those. How many of those are still around? I mean, that have they found? There's not many.
I think there is one at the Marshall Foundation.
Oh, okay.
I think there is, because the Marshall Foundation, we have in past times conducted a teacher immersion workshop, which did exactly what it sounds. It immersed teachers in an education about Marshall and the Marshall Plan.
To be quite honest, the impact of the Marshall Plan after World War II has been my absolute favorite topics and the relevancy of it, because I didn't know, and I know a lot of the people that I know don't know.
Our time is getting away from us,
Okay.
and I know you brought some things from the center you
yes.
wanted to kind of showcase. Why don't you show some of those?
Okay. In the fall, we lost a tree, a white oak tree on the Marshall property that Joe estimated was about 330 years old by counting the rings. So we thought it was such a great loss that we should do something to make it last. And so we had the suggestion from Joe that we make objects out of wood from the tree. So this is a gavel and a striking block, and we call it the Marshall Oak. So there's a little, logo there. And we're also making pens and letter openers of different styles. So we are not going to sell these items. We're going to give them to donors at various levels. So we're initiating a campaign to,
Past tense, Pat.
we have initiated a campaign. Okay. We're hoping to raise funds to continue our work by offering them oak tree
Great.
memorabilia.
After some 14 years of being a committee chairman here, I always got tired of having to rummage through the drawer to see if somebody left me a gavel to preside over. I'd like to see some of the committee chairmen make a modest contribution to the Marshall Center, and we'd be happy to generate them a gavel set with their name and title on it.
Oh, neat. That's very neat.
So we are accepting orders.
We have about a minute left, and I do want to kind of bring up just very briefly the note, and I hope the docents do address this, because many people don't know that General Marshall and his family, they were a Gold Star family with the loss of
Exactly.
a son. And so briefly kind of just chat about that, because it's
You're
such
the
an
best.
important topic.
Actually, I've been considering writing an account of his death, because I've been able to, first of all, I've written about 15 such biographies for other people, and I managed to run down quite a bit of information on Alan Tupper Brown. And it's really a fascinating story and a heart-wrenching story, because he had to tell Mrs. Marshall there at the house what an unenviable duty.
Exactly, and so many families had to do that then and still have to do that. So, well, our time is about up here now, and I truly appreciate, Pat, you coming in and sharing all the great works you're doing. And Delegate May, it's been always an honor to sit with you and visit with you, and I appreciate everything you've always done for the entire Commonwealth of Virginia.
No, absolutely our pleasure.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. And thank you for watching this edition of Cable Reports. I'm Ray Lemura.